여기 배달 왔습니다. 맛있게 드세요.
Everyone in that glass tower thought the most dangerous person in the room was the man who could order a killing with a nod. They were wrong. The most dangerous person was holding a bag of cold dumplings, and she was about to prove it in 5 languages. If you believe people deserve respect no matter what job they hold or how they look, hit subscribe right now. This story's got liars, snakes, and one woman nobody saw coming. And trust me, you don't want to miss what she does next. Only the doubters skip the follow. The 41st floor of the Grand Soyan Hotel smelled like money and quiet panic, which, if you've never smelled it, is basically expensive cologne over flop sweat. Kang Min-jae sat at the head of a glass conference table that had probably cost more than most people's houses, wearing the kind of composed face that had made 3 separate rival organizations regret underestimating him. Composed on the outside. Inside, something closer to a 5-alarm fire. His translator, a nervous man named Yoon who'd worked for him for 6 years, had not shown up. No call, no text. Just an empty chair and a silence that kept getting heavier, like someone was slowly stacking bricks on Min-jae's chest. Across the table sat 3 men who did not speak a word of Korean, at least not one they were willing to admit to. Their own interpreter, young, slick, entirely too pleased with himself, kept translating Min-jae's careful, measured Korean into English that sounded almost right. Almost. Close enough that nobody in the room but Min-jae could feel the knife twisting slightly with every sentence. Mr. Kang says he considers this partnership beneath his family's legacy, the interpreter said smoothly, in English, to the delight of the men across the table, who exchanged a look that translated in any language. We've got him. Min-jae had said no such thing. He'd said the opposite. But he had no way to prove it, and everyone at that table knew it. He was the king of an empire he suddenly could not speak inside of. 2 of the men across the table were already reaching for their jackets. Not because the meeting was over, because it was about to become something else, something with consequences. Min-jae's bodyguards near the door tensed, the way men tense when they've been trained to notice tension in other men. That's when the door opened. Nobody had buzzed anyone up. Nobody had cleared it. And yet in walked a woman in a delivery uniform 2 sizes too casual for a room with a marble floor, holding a paper bag that was very obviously getting cold, looking not at the 12 powerful men staring at her, but at the little slip of paper in her hand. I need a signature for, she started in English, then stopped because she'd heard something, a phrase. A specific phrase, repeated in Korean by the young interpreter, twisted just enough to turn an insult where there hadn't been one. She looked up. And for a woman just delivering dumplings, her voice came out steady as a judge's gavel. That's not what he said. Every head in the room turned. One of the bodyguards actually laughed, a short, disbelieving bark, the kind of sound men make right before something expensive breaks in front of them. Because that was the joke, wasn't it? A plus-size Ghanaian woman in a courier vest, correcting a professional interpreter, in the middle of a deal worth more money than her whole neighborhood would see in a decade. The bodyguard wasn't laughing at her cruelty. He was laughing because it was, on its face, absurd. 30 seconds later, nobody was laughing. Abina Mensa set the dumplings down on the nearest empty chair, because if she was about to ruin someone's evening, she at least wanted her hands free, and repeated, word for word, flawlessly, exactly what Min-jae had actually said. Then she repeated what the interpreter had said instead. Then she waited, arms crossed, for someone in that room to tell her she was wrong. Nobody did, because she wasn't. Min-jae's eyes moved from the woman in the delivery uniform to his own interpreter. The young man's face had gone the color of old rice. And something in Min-jae's chest that had been clenched since Yoon disappeared finally, slowly, began to unclench. He didn't know her name yet. He didn't know she'd once turned down a scholarship interview because her mother needed the bus fare more than she needed a future. He didn't know that the woman standing in his boardroom, arms crossed, radiating the calm fury of someone who'd spent her whole life being underestimated, was about to become the only person in his empire he could actually trust. All he knew in that moment was one simple fact. The food delivery woman had just called out a lie in perfect Korean, and the entire room, every powerful, dangerous, carefully composed man in it, had gone completely, utterly silent. Min-jae did not sleep that night. He kept replaying it. Not the deal, not the money, not even the 2 men who'd left the room looking like they'd swallowed a live wire. He kept replaying the woman. The way she'd said that's not what he said, like she was reading off a grocery list instead of detonating a bomb in the middle of a $1 billion negotiation. By 6 the next morning, he had a name. Abina Mensa, 29, Ghanaian. 3 years in the country, most of them spent on a bicycle that had seen better decades, delivering food to people who tipped badly and looked at her uniform longer than they looked at her face. He also had something else. A folder, thin but heavy in the way certain files are, full of things that made a very rich, very careful man go quiet in a way his own staff had learned to fear. Scholarship offers, plural, from programs that didn't hand those out to just anyone. Letters from professors, one of whom had written, in the kind of formal language academics use when they're genuinely rattled, that Abina possessed one of the most naturally gifted linguistic minds I have encountered in 20 years of teaching. And then, tucked at the back, the reason none of it had mattered, a death certificate for her father dated 4 years ago, and a stack of hospital bills that had eaten every scholarship, every opportunity, every version of her future that didn't involve a bicycle and a delivery app. Min-jae closed the folder. He was a man who understood leverage, who bought loyalty, rented silence, and paid for information the way other men paid for coffee. But this wasn't leverage. This was just a woman who'd made a choice most people in his organization had never been brave enough to make. She'd chosen her family over herself every single time and never once made it anyone else's problem. He found himself doing something he hadn't done in years. He felt something close to shame. He didn't call her. Men like Min-jae didn't call, they arranged. 2 days later, a driver showed up at the small apartment Abina shared with her mother and 2 younger brothers, holding a card with an address and a single line. Mr. Kang requests your assistance. You will be compensated fairly for your time. Fair, in this case, turned out to be more money for 1 afternoon of translation than Abena made in 2 exhausting weeks of deliveries. She should have said no. Every instinct that had kept her safe in a new country told her to say no. Men like Kang Min-jae did not request assistance from delivery women out of the kindness of their hearts. Men like that collected people the way other men collected watches. But her youngest brother needed shoes, and her mother's medication wasn't going to pay for itself. So Abina put on the one blazer she owned that didn't have a stain on it, and she went. The meeting room was smaller this time. No rivals, no audience, just Min-jae, a stack of documents in 3 languages, and an expression that Abina couldn't quite place until she realized what it was. Nervousness, badly disguised as authority. You embarrassed my organization, he said in Korean, watching her carefully. Your organization embarrassed itself, Abina replied, not missing a beat, sliding into the chair across from him like she hadn't just corrected a Mafia boss's staff in front of 12 dangerous men 2 nights ago. I just said it out loud. Something flickered across his face, not anger, which she'd braced for, but the ghost of something almost like a laugh, quickly suppressed, the way a man suppresses a laugh at a funeral because he knows it's inappropriate but can't quite help himself. You could have stayed silent, he said. It would have been safer. Probably, Abina agreed, opening the first document without waiting to be told to. But you were about to lose a deal because nobody in this building bothered to tell you the truth. Somebody had to. Min-jae studied her for a long moment, long enough that his assistant, hovering by the door, shifted uncomfortably, unsure whether to interrupt. Why? He asked finally. You don't know me. You don't owe me anything. Abina looked up from the papers, and for the first time since she'd walked into that boardroom in her delivery vest, her easy professional composure cracked just slightly, enough to show the exhaustion underneath, the years of being smart in rooms that only wanted her to be quiet. Because somebody underestimated me my whole life too, she said. I know what it costs when nobody speaks up. Min-jae said nothing, but he didn't look away either. And somewhere behind his carefully composed face, a very old, very guarded door creaked open, just a crack. Word travels fast in an empire built on whispers. By the end of the week, everyone from the boardroom to the parking garage knew that Kang Min-jae had a new translator, and that she wasn't just good, she was terrifyingly good. She caught things. Contradictions buried 3 sentences deep. A single mistranslated preposition that once nearly cost a shipping contract. She didn't just translate words, she translated intentions, and in Min-jae's world, intentions were worth more than gold. Naturally, some people hated that. Chief among them was a man named Do-yoon, Min-jae's second-in-command, smooth, ambitious, and allergic to anyone getting closer to Min-jae than he was. Do-yoon had spent 15 years climbing toward the inner circle one careful favor at a time, and he was not about to watch a delivery woman leapfrog him in a matter of weeks. She's a liability, Do-yoon said one evening, standing in Min-jae's office with the particular calm of a man who thinks he's about to win an argument. We don't know where her loyalties lie. Her loyalties, Min-jae said, not looking up from his desk, lie with the truth. That's more than I can say for half the men in this building. Do-yeon's jaw tightened just slightly, the kind of tell a man makes when he's furious but too smart to show it. People are talking about her, about how she looks, how she got here. It's undignified for someone in your position. Min-jae finally looked up. Say what you actually mean, Do-yeon. I mean, Do-yeon said carefully, that a plus-size delivery woman from Ghana is not who anyone expected to see whispering in your ear during the biggest negotiations of your career. People wonder what she's really after. For a long moment, the room went very quiet, the kind of quiet Min-jae's people had learned to fear more than shouting. She saved this deal, Min-jae said, finally standing. And 2 nights ago, she caught something in that meeting that even you missed. So unless you'd like me to start wondering what you're really after, I'd drop it. Do-yeon dropped it. But he didn't forget it. Men like Do-yeon never do. Abina, for her part, had no idea how close she was to becoming a target. She was too busy juggling 3 jobs at once. The deliveries she still hadn't quit because trust was not something she extended quickly, even to men who paid generously. The translation work, which had somehow tripled in the last 2 weeks. And her mother, who kept asking, in the gently suspicious tone only mothers can manage, why her daughter kept coming home smelling like a 5-star hotel. It's just work, Mama, Abina said, for the 4th time that week, stirring a pot of jollof rice while her youngest brother did homework at the kitchen table in his new shoes. Her mother said, in the universal maternal tone that means I don't believe you, but I'll let it go for now. The truth was, Abina didn't fully understand it either. She hadn't expected to find herself thinking about Min-jae's face when he was concentrating, the way his jaw set when he was working through a problem, like the answer was a lock he intended to pick with sheer will. She hadn't expected the small, dry jokes he made when no one else was around to hear him make them. She definitely hadn't expected a man who controlled an empire built on fear to ask her opinion on things and actually, genuinely, listen to the answer. It scared her a little. Powerful men who listened were rarer than powerful men who lied, and she'd learned the hard way which one to trust. The real trouble started with an invitation. A diplomatic dinner, 3 weeks out, hosted by a rival organization that had been circling Min-jae's territory for months, smiling the whole time the way sharks smile, which is to say, not really smiling at all. Officially, it was a gesture of goodwill. Unofficially, everyone in the room knew that goodwill in this world usually came with a hidden price tag. Min-jae wanted Abina there. Do-yeon wanted her nowhere near it. It's too dangerous, Do-yeon argued in the next strategy meeting. She's not trained for this world. If something goes wrong, Min-jae cut in, she's the only person in this room who'll actually catch it before it happens. He wasn't wrong. But he also wasn't thinking, in that moment, about the fact that inviting Abina into rooms like that one didn't just put her in the path of rival organizations. It put her in the path of whoever inside his own circle had been waiting, patiently, for the perfect moment to make a delivery woman disappear the same way his last translator had. The dinner was held at a restaurant so exclusive it didn't have a sign, just a black door and a man built like a refrigerator standing in front of it, deciding who got to eat. Abina wore the blazer again, plus a dress her mother had insisted on ironing twice, muttering the whole time about how her daughter was going to fancy dinners now. Very fancy, in a tone that suggested she both approved and suspected everything. Min-jae met her in the private lobby, and for a moment, just a moment, the two of them stood there in silence, 2 people from opposite ends of the world, both dressed for a battlefield disguised as a dinner party. Rules for tonight, he said quietly. Smile. Translate exactly what's said, even the parts that sound like nothing, especially the parts that sound like nothing. I know how to do my job, Abina said. I know, Min-jae said. I'm nervous. I say strange things when I'm nervous. It was, she realized, the closest thing to an actual joke she'd ever heard him make out loud, and despite herself, she smiled. The host of the dinner was a man named Hyun Woo, head of a rival organization that had spent the better part of a decade trying to nibble at the edges of Min-jae's territory, the way a man nibbles at a diet he's not actually committed to. He was warm, charming, the kind of warmth that makes the hair on your arms stand up, because real warmth doesn't usually come with quite that many teeth. Such an honor, Hyun-woo said in Korean, smiling at Min-jae while his eyes drifted, just briefly, to Abina. And this must be your new translator. I've heard remarkable things. Abina translated it flatly, professionally, exactly as said. Then she caught the next part. The part Hyun-woo said to his own man beside him, quiet, almost under his breath, thinking no one at the table could follow fast enough to catch it. Careful. She's faster than the last one. That's why the last one had to go. Abina's stomach dropped, but her face didn't move. Years of being underestimated had taught her exactly one useful skill: how to keep a completely blank expression while her mind ran laps around a room. She leaned toward Min-jae, murmuring under the noise of clinking glasses. He just said something about your last translator, about why he had to go. Min-jae's easy dinner smile didn't crack, but something in his eyes went very, very still. The stillness of a man recalculating an entire battlefield in real time. Keep smiling, he murmured back, and keep listening. Here's the thing about men like Hyun-woo. They think politeness is a disguise clever enough to fool anyone. They think if they smile wide enough, nobody will notice the knife hidden behind their back, sharpened just for the moment their guard slips. If you've ever sat across a table from someone like that, someone who smiled at you while quietly working to take everything you'd built, you already know exactly how this dinner felt. Comment below if you've ever had to keep smiling at someone you knew was lying straight to your face. Because that's the real horror of this story. It's not the guns, it's the smiling. By the time dessert arrived, Abena had caught 2 more slips, small ones, careless ones, the kind men make when they've grown too comfortable, assuming no one in the room can actually understand what they're saying. Each one confirmed what Min-jae had feared since his translator vanished. Yoon hadn't run. Yoon had been removed, deliberately, to leave Min-jae blind and vulnerable at exactly the moment his rivals needed him weakest. And the person who'd arranged it wasn't sitting across the table smiling at all. Abena felt it before she understood it, a small, cold detail nagging at the edge of her mind all through dinner. Hyun-woo's men had used a phrase twice that only someone with inside knowledge of Min-jae's organization would think to use. Not the kind of phrase a rival would know. The kind of phrase only someone inside would leak. She didn't say it out loud at the table. Some things you don't translate in front of the person smiling at you with all their teeth. But in the car afterward, driving back through streets lit gold and quiet, she finally said it. Min-jae, I don't think Hyun-woo did this alone. He turned to look at her, and in the dim light of the car, his expression was the expression of a man who already suspected the answer and had simply been waiting, dreading, for someone to say it first. Somebody in my own circle, he said quietly. It wasn't a question. Somebody in your own circle, Abena confirmed. Suspicion is a slow poison. It doesn't kill you all at once. It just makes you look a little longer at every face you used to trust without thinking twice. Min-jae spent the next several days doing exactly that. He watched his people the way he'd once watched rival negotiators, searching for the tiny tells, the almost nothing gestures that separated loyalty from performance. It was exhausting in a way that guns and money had never been. You can armor yourself against bullets. There's no armor against wondering which of your own men is smiling at you while planning your funeral. Do-yeon, unsurprisingly, made the short list. He'd been furious about Abena from day one. He'd have motive, opportunity, and, as Min-jae quietly discovered while pulling old records late one night, a curious pattern of private meetings with men connected, however loosely, to Hyun-woo's organization. It should have been an easy answer. Tidy. Satisfying. Abena wasn't so sure. It's too easy, she said, going over the shipping logs Min-jae had pulled, spread across his desk like a crime scene nobody had bothered to close off with tape. Do-yeon doesn't hide things well. If he was your traitor, you'd have caught him a year ago. You think someone's setting him up, Min-jae said. I think, Abena said slowly, tapping a specific line in the log. Whoever did this wanted you looking exactly where you're looking right now, at the guy everyone already suspects. It's the oldest trick in the book. Give the king an obvious villain so he stops looking for the real one. Min-jae studied her for a long moment, something unreadable passing behind his eyes. You'd have made a dangerous strategist. I deliver dumplings for a living, Abena said dryly. Apparently that's the same skill set. The real traitor, as it turned out, had made exactly one mistake. The same mistake liars always make eventually, which is assuming the person listening to them isn't paying close enough attention to catch the seams. It happened 3 days later, in a meeting about a routine shipment. Nothing dramatic, nothing anyone in the room expected to matter. A logistics manager named So-jin, quiet, unremarkable, the kind of man who'd been in the organization so long nobody thought to double-check his loyalty anymore, made an offhand comment about rerouting a shipment the way we did it before, with Yoon. It was such a small thing, such an ordinary thing to say. Except Yoon, the translator who'd vanished the night this all began, had never once, in 6 years, been involved in logistics. Translators didn't reroute shipments. There was no reason for So-jin to even know Yoon's name in that context, let alone reference a shared history that shouldn't have existed. Abena caught it instantly. She didn't react. She'd learned by now that reacting was the fastest way to get someone killed before you had proof. She waited until the meeting ended, until Seo-jin had gathered his files and left the room with the easy, unbothered posture of a man who thought he'd gotten away clean, before she leaned toward Min-jae. Seo-jin knew Yoon, not as a coworker, as something else. Min-jae's face didn't change, but his hand, resting on the table, went very still. "You're sure?" "I don't guess about language," Abena said. "I'm sure." "Here's a question worth sitting with if you've made it this far. How many people around you are quietly loyal to something other than what they claim?" Seo-jin had smiled at Min-jae for years, shaken his hand, called him boss with what looked, from the outside, like total sincerity. If you've ever found out someone close to you was playing a completely different game the whole time, drop a comment, because Min-jae was about to learn that lesson the hard way, and it was going to cost him more than just a shipment. Min-jae didn't confront Seo-jin immediately. A smarter, more patient man doesn't rip the mask off the moment he spots it. He watches. Waits. Lets the traitor believe he's still invisible, right up until the moment it matters most. But patience, Min-jae was learning, came with its own risk. Because whatever So-jin and Hyun-woo were planning, the diplomatic dinner had been step one, not the finale. And the next meeting on Min-jae's calendar, quiet, routine, the kind of gathering nobody thought twice about, had already been chosen carefully as the place where the real trap would finally spring shut. Abena didn't know that yet, neither did Min-jae, but somebody in that room already did. The meeting was scheduled for a Tuesday, which should have been Min-jae's first clue that something was wrong, because nothing important in his world ever happened on a Tuesday. Tuesdays were for the boring stuff. Routine check-ins, paperwork, the kind of meeting where you bring coffee instead of bodyguards. That, of course, was exactly the point. It was billed as a courtesy sit-down. 3 smaller organizations, including a token representative from Hyun-woo's camp, gathering to discuss shared shipping routes. Low stakes, low security. The kind of meeting where a man like Min-jae let his guard down not because he was careless, but because nobody sane starts a war over cargo manifests. Abena didn't like it from the moment she walked in, not because of anything she could name, just a low, persistent hum of wrongness, the same instinct that had once told her never to trust a landlord who smiled too much before raising the rent. "Something's off," she murmured to Min-jae as they took their seats. "It's a shipping meeting," he murmured back. "The most dangerous thing here is bad coffee." She wanted to believe him. She almost did, right up until Seo-jin walked in 15 minutes late, sat down without his usual folder of logistics reports, and said absolutely nothing for the first 10 minutes of the meeting, which for a man who normally couldn't stop talking about container weights, was its own kind of confession. The trap, when it came, didn't announce itself with shouting or drawn weapons. It came fittingly through language. One of Hyun-woo's representatives, polite, forgettable, exactly the kind of man you'd never suspect, leaned toward the man beside him and said, in low, rapid Korean, a phrase that should have meant nothing. "Tell the driver the shipment leaves at the second signal." Innocent. Boring. Except Abena had heard that exact phrase before. 3 days earlier, buried in the coded exchange at the diplomatic dinner, the one that hadn't made sense until just now, sitting in a room with too few exits and too many men who suddenly weren't looking at their coffee anymore. It wasn't about a shipment. The second signal was the trigger phrase, and it had just been given. Abena grabbed Min-jae's wrist under the table, hard enough that he turned, already reading the alarm on her face before she said a single word. "We need to leave, now." To his credit, Min-jae didn't waste time asking why. Years of surviving in a world built on backstabbing had taught him one golden rule. When the person who catches lies for a living tells you to move, you move first and ask questions later. He stood smoothly, the way a man stands when he wants to look like he's simply stretching rather than escaping. "Apologies, an urgent call. We'll reconvene." It should have worked. It almost did. The gunfire started 3 seconds after Min-jae reached the door. Not aimed at him, thankfully, because Abena's warning had bought them exactly enough time to be somewhere else when the ambush actually sprang. The chairs where they'd been sitting took the first shots instead, glass and wood exploding outward in a mess that would have very much included Min-jae's spine had he still been in it. Chaos erupted. Bodyguards who'd been standing lazily by the walls suddenly had guns drawn, shouting directions, dragging Minjae and Abena through a side door that led, thankfully, to a stairwell instead of a dead end. Abina's heart was hammering so hard she could feel it in her teeth, but her mind, infuriatingly, uselessly calm even now, was still working, still cataloging details the way it always did. The shooters hadn't been strangers rushed in from outside. They'd known exactly which exits to block, exactly which chairs to target. Somebody in that room had given them a floor plan. They made it to the parking garage, breathless, alive. Minjae's jacket torn at the shoulder from where a bodyguard had shoved him hard out of the doorway. He turned to Abena, chest heaving, something raw and unguarded, finally breaking through the careful composure he wore like armor. "You saved my life," he said. "Again." "You're welcome," Abena said, hands shaking now that the adrenaline had nowhere left to go. "Can we maybe not do that a third time?" He almost laughed, a short, disbelieving sound, the kind that comes out when your body doesn't know whether to cry or collapse with relief. Then his face hardened, the humor burning off as fast as it had arrived. "Seo-jin didn't come back to the car," he said quietly. Abena went still. "You think he ran?" "I think," Minjae said, "he already knew exactly when to leave the room." Somewhere behind them, sirens were starting, distant and rising. But the real danger, they both understood now, wasn't the one that had just tried and failed to kill them. It was the one still walking around free, wearing Minjae's trust like a stolen coat. And Abena had a sinking, cold feeling that whatever came next was about to reach directly into her own forgotten past. They found Yoon 2 days later, in the basement of a warehouse Hyunwoo's organization used for storage, which, as it turned out, meant storing exactly the kind of secrets men prefer nobody ever finds. He was alive. Thinner, bruised, but alive. And the moment he saw Abena walk through that door beside Minjae, he broke down sobbing in a way that had nothing to do with relief and everything to do with guilt. "I'm sorry," he kept saying in Korean, then in broken English, like the apology needed to work in every language to actually count. "I'm so sorry." It turned out Yoon hadn't vanished by choice. He'd been taken the night before that first meeting, grabbed quietly, held just long enough to force Minjae into a room with no translator and no defenses. But the guilt eating at him wasn't about that. It went back further, to a name he hadn't expected to ever hear whispered through a locked door, Abena Mensa's. Years ago, before any of this, Yoon had worked administrative processing for an international scholarship board. He'd been the one, young, overworked, more concerned with his quota than a stranger's future, who'd buried Abena's late compensation paperwork after her father's death, the funds that should have covered her family's debts while she chased her scholarship instead of a delivery bike. A clerical error, he'd told himself for years. Just paperwork. Not his fault her life fell apart because of it, except when Hyunwoo's men bragged, gloating about the delivery woman who'd humiliated them, and Yoon heard her name. The guilt he'd buried for years came roaring back louder than the fear of his captors. He'd started slipping information to a guard sympathetic to Minjae's side, small things, breadcrumbs, anything that might protect the woman whose life he'd quietly ruined without ever meeting her. It was why they'd kept him locked up instead of simply disposing of him. It was also, in a strange, backwards way, why he was still breathing. Abena listened to the whole confession in silence, arms crossed, the same steady posture she'd worn the night she walked into that boardroom with cold dumplings and an inconvenient amount of truth. When Yoon finished, waiting for whatever judgment she might deliver, she said only one thing. "You could have just told the truth years ago instead of hiding behind a filing error." Then, quieter. "But you told it eventually. That counts for something." It wasn't forgiveness, exactly, but it was enough for a man who'd spent years drowning in a debt he could never repay. Seo-jin didn't get the same mercy. Caught 2 blocks from the ambush site with a phone full of messages to Hyunwoo's people, he folded within hours, trading names for leniency he wasn't going to get. Hyunwoo, stripped of his inside man and his element of surprise, found his carefully built alliance collapsing exactly the way alliances built on lies tend to, all at once and loudly. Minjae didn't need guns to finish it. He needed proof, and thanks to a woman who refused to let a single mistranslated word slide past her, he finally had it. Hyunwoo's territory folded into Minjae's within the month. Do-yeon, cleared entirely of suspicion, and a little chastened by how loudly he'd argued against the person who'd twice saved his boss's life, became grudgingly one of Abena's biggest defenders. As for Abena, she never went back to delivering dumplings, though she kept the old bicycle, oiled and parked by her mother's door, a reminder of exactly how far she'd climbed. Her mother's medical bills were paid in full before she even asked. Her brothers got new shoes, then better schools, then futures that didn't hinge on whether a scholarship board processed paperwork correctly. And Min Jae, a man who'd spent his whole life believing loyalty had to be purchased, learned, slowly, that the most valuable thing in his empire had walked in wearing a courier vest, expecting nothing, and had ended up staying because, for the first time, someone had finally seen her clearly instead of just seeing her size, her job, or her uniform. They didn't announce anything to the world. They didn't need to. But the next time Min Jae sat at the head of that glass table, Abina sat beside him, not as hired help, not as a delivery woman anyone dared underestimate again, but as the one voice in the room everyone knew told the truth, no matter who it cost. The room that had once laughed at her now went quiet the moment she spoke. Some things, it turned out, never changed. They just finally made sense.